Hey everyone, and welcome back to Smart Architectural Programming. This is the official companion video for our book Introduction to Java, and today we're diving into a very powerful and flexible feature in Java, Varargs. It's difficult to pronounce in a way because it's not a meaningful word, but this is an important aspect to Java. It's basically Varargs is a short for variable length arguments, right? So whether you're writing flexible methods or just trying to simplify your code, Varargs can save you time and effort. So let's break down what Varargs are and how they work and when to use them. Before we start, basically remember this is chapter 7 of our Introduction to Java book, where we're covering different ways how you can work with methods in Java. And this is one of the core understandings that you need to develop to get flexible in using methods in Java easily and efficiently. So without further ado, let's push forward and learn about what are Varargs basically. So what are Varargs, right? We need to understand that in Java, Varargs allows a method to accept 0 or more arguments of the same time, right? Think of it as a saying, I don't know how many parameters I'll need, just give me however many you are. So what does this mean? This basically means is instead of methods having a fixed number of parameters that you have to fulfill for it to work, you can also tell the method, hey, I think I have 3 methods instead of 5, or I have 0 methods arguments instead of 2. So can you let this pass? The system might say, if you have set this up properly, it might say, all right. But if you haven't set this properly, it would say, nah, man, I ain't gonna push forward with that. So basically that's what Varargs can do. Why are Varargs useful? That's an important aspect to understand, right? Now that we know about that, basically, let's say you want to sum numbers, right? You could write different methods for 2, 3, 4 numbers, or use Varargs and accept any amount of numbers. And I think I discussed this in our other video on method overloading by giving this example of having different addition functions, right? To overload them, like add with different method overloading, which is a previous video that you might have seen. If you're not, please look at that video. That's a very important video in leveraging methods in Java. So coming back to this video, so if you need to do addition or subtraction, you might need to write different functions for two ints or 2 numbers addition, 3 numbers addition, 4 number addition, 5 number addition, and this might become unlimited as you go along. But if you use Varargs, you can make sure you can just write one function and that could do addition from 2 to all the way to infinity and beyond. And I'm just kind of exaggerating here. It's definitely not going to be infinity, because that's definitely something that you can't do, or the computer might not have the capacity or the hardware to process. So that's just an exaggeration to drive in the point that Varargs can accept a dynamic number of arguments basically. So before we get deeper into different more detailed aspects of Varargs, we need to understand how the syntax and the rules of Varargs work. So if you see my screen right now, you'll see that there's the syntax here. When we write the 3 dots here with string, this means we are using Varargs. So you can have multiple names pushed into this this particular method, right? This tells Java basically that this is a Varargs parameter. This parameter can accept as many or as little arguments as possible. And string ... names means that you can pass any number of strings basically, if you want to get down at the meat of the issue. With strings ... it means you can put in as many names as possible and as fewer names as possible. But there's some important rules, as you can see on the right hand corner of the screen, that you must be familiar with when you're using Varargs. You can only have one Varargs parameter per method. You can't have more than one Vararg parameter per method. It must be the last parameter in this method. It must be, that's the syntax and that's the rules governing Varargs in Java. So it must always be the last parameter. And Varargs are treated internally as arrays basically. So when you put in a value in a Vararg, always treat it like an array has been pushed into as a variable into your method. So you need to process this value, the vararg parameter, in a way that you would process arrays before you actually run it run it through the logic that you might want to execute on those parameters, like names. If you want to print them, you might have to run a loop to print everything within the array, or if you want to add numbers, you might want to loop through it again and add them one by one. So always treat vararg parameters when coming into a function as an array, and treat them as such to process the logic as you need it to be processed. So the third thing we need to understand is how varargs work internally, right? So if you see my screen here, basically you'll notice that we internally varargs are just arrays, as I mentioned earlier, right? So when we call print names, we have names Alice, Bob, and Charlie, as you can see here. This value right here, this we run this code on Java, right? So inside the method, you can treat names like a regular array, right? So when we print the names, this is an array, and it prints them as an array name here, basically. So that is basically how varargs work internally as arrays. Always remember that. And I think we explained that in detail previously, but driving in this point, no matter how many times, is an essential, crucial aspect of understanding how varargs work. So combining varargs with other parameters is another important aspect that you need to understand, right? You see code here, basically. I think this code arrow should only be pointing in one direction. It's circulating, which is kind of weird. So remember, this is pointing this side. This is the arrow's direction, as I'm showing it here. It's moving from the bottom to up. So you're clear that it isn't working when the arrow is rotating uselessly. Yeah. So you need to understand here that as we run this code here, varargs demo code here, like we have a method here, log messages, right? It has one parameter, which is a normal parameter. We must have this for this function to work. And then we have the varargs special syntax here with messages. So the messages is the varargs parameter. So to run that, we use a for loop, string message colon messages, to print out all aspects within the messages parameter, right? So basically in this, the first parameter level is always going to be required, and everything after that is optional because it's a vararg parameter, and the varargs must come last. So basically, based on that, when we call this this method here, we'll use log messages info, which is the level information, and then we started adding the vararg parameters, and all of these are vararg parameters. Yeah, let's circle this here and close this, and this includes this section here as well. So anything after for the first one are vararg parameters, which are going to be coalesced in an array and then processed as needed in the by the method, basically. So, and keep in mind here one more thing. You notice vararg parameter came at the end, and here as well. First one was the normal parameter, which is the level parameter, and this is the varargs parameter that we're dealing with here. So this understanding must be consistent as we move along. So let's look at some practical examples in varargs, basically, and try to understand this on a practical level of how the code is set up for vararg parameters and what scenarios. So as we mentioned first, sum of numbers. So in Java, right? So let me cut this out. This is weird. So basically, what you need to remember here is that we need to sum numbers that are coming in, right? And we need to be flexible, so we don't have to write code for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and up to infinity. Again, that's an exaggeration, but it could come to that if you try to code out every aspect of how many numbers some user might give in. So we have varargs here, and then we have an int total equals to 0. That's the totaling counter. Then we use the for loop to recover the for loop, because these numbers are coming in as arrays, and only when we run it as an array can we go over each number and add that to the total, as we're doing here, right? And then we return the total value here. So how do you run this? We can do it sum 1 2, or we can do sum 1 2 3 4 5. right? And it works fine in either case. So that's the problem that we're solving with Varargs here. Instead of creating different methods for different amounts of parameters, one method is enough to deal with all addition operations. So then another example that you might want to look into is formatter utility in Java. And again, we need to cross this out because this is something that should not be on the screen. But yeah, so on the formatter utility, as you can see in the code here, we print formatted. We have a string format which tells us what format we need to print, and then we have object args. Basically, we want an object data type, and we can have as many and object args that we want, or none at all, right? And then we can just print them out as format and args, right? So this works like printf, very powerful when writing flexible logging or display tools, but it reminds you how on practical level how this is going to be used. So remember, now that we understand a lot of different things on Varargs and their usage, their understanding, and how they're practically used in different scenarios, we need to understand some of the common mistakes that you need to avoid, right? So always remember to not put parameters after Varargs. Varargs are the last parameter in any method that you set up. Always remember that. If you don't, you're going to have problems with Varargs. They're going to raise a very huge scene on your terminal and not let you move forward, basically. So always have Varargs as the last argument. Number 2, don't confuse Varargs with method overloading. That's different. Method overloading is when you use the same methods with the same name with different parameters. Varargs is where you can have unlimited arguments in a single method. There's a major difference between these two things. Never confuse them. And number 3, don't modify Varargs array directly unless you know what you're doing, basically. Remember, you can't modify the Varargs array directly unless you understand what's coming in. So always be mindful of that. So let's wrap up what we covered in this video, right? We covered what Varargs are, how to use them, internal behavior, combining them with other parameters, and real-world examples on seeing how they're being used. This is just one of the many powerful tools Java gives you to code exceptionally powerful applications. So for more in-depth topics, exercises, and code challenges, be sure to check out our and pick up a copy of our book, Introduction to Java, available now on all major platforms. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell so you won't miss the next companion video or any video on our channel where we share all we know about programming on different languages. Thanks for watching and keep coding smart. That's it from me on Smart Architectural Programming. And I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.